Today, we are in Baltimore, Maryland, visiting the final resting place, the grave of horror legend, Edgar Allan Poe. Believe it or not, in downtown Baltimore, Maryland, you will find the Westminster Hall and Burying Ground. Such an odd place for a church and a cemetery, but it is here you will find the final resting place of Edgar Allan Poe. Behind this old black wrought iron fence, it's hard to believe that the master of horror himself is buried in this cemetery. It's a small cemetery, but what's really neat, as soon as you walk in, Poe is right there to greet you. It looks like today somebody has left an apple for Edgar Allan Poe.
Wherever I come, bad luck just comes my way. Wherever I go, hard luck is there to stay. Good luck never stays a day. Bad luck's always coming my way.
The headstone here for Poe is actually quite nice, and around the stone itself are these plaques that you can read. There's one of them here. And right there is a portrait of Poe himself, master of the macabre. The tomb of Edgar Allan Poe, one of America's greatest writers, draws visitors to Westminster from across the globe. It's a little hard to see, but here's a medallion with Poe's face on it. It says 1809 to 1849. It's almost like it's a penny. It's kind of 3D. It's got some feeling to it. Very neat, very neat. Oh, and they even have his mustache. Now let's go ahead and walk around the stone and give you an idea of what it says. Over here it says, Maria Poe Clem, born March 17th, 1790 and died February 16th, 1871. On the other side, Edgar Allan Poe, born January 20th, 1809 and died October 17th, 1849. That's awesome. And over here, Virginia Clem Poe, born August 15th, 1822, died January 30th, 1847. Here's another information plaque with the raven, an old map of Baltimore. You go a little further over, there's 203 Amity Street, which is Poe's last Baltimore residence. And then it goes on to talk about Poe and some people that are close to him, including Virginia and Maria Clem. This information plaque says a monument to the memory of Edgar Allan Poe, and it's got some old pictures. But what's really cool is over here, they have a very old photo dating back to 1875 when the monument was unveiled. And over here there's some kids visiting Poe. And in between both information plaques is this old brass plaque that was brought from France and restored by Westminster Hall here in Baltimore. That's actually really neat. But if you come here to visit Edgar Allan Poe, you need to walk further back into the cemetery because, just like Poe's stories, it gets a little dark, a little mysterious. There's another grave for Poe. You see, when Edgar Allan Poe died, he was buried in an unmarked grave in this cemetery, and for years nobody knew where he was buried. Eventually, one of the caretakers of the cemetery, through records, found out where Edgar Allan Poe was buried, well, in close proximity of where he was buried, put a stone there, but eventually the stone became overgrown and he was again lost to time. But now there's a permanent headstone there to mark the original burying place of Edgar Allan Poe, and in my opinion, it's a lot cooler than where he's buried now. Edgar Allan Poe is currently buried at the front of the cemetery, but his original burying place is back here in the back. And there's a raven that sits on top of it, and it says, "Quoth the raven, nevermore." Original burial place of Edgar Allan Poe from October 9th, 1849 until November 17th, 1875. Miss Maria Clem, his mother-in-law, lies upon his right, and Virginia Poe, his wife, upon his left, under the monument erected to him in this cemetery. up in the front. But this is it. Crazy, right? I love this stone more than I love the one that's up in the front. Such a beautiful cemetery. Oh man, this is kind of sad. Here's an information plaque about Poe. And the two pictures that they have here, somebody cut his picture out. Wonder why they haven't replaced this. They should have had something a little bit more permanent on it. Now the real question becomes, does it get any more grim and macabre as Edgar Allan Poe? Back in the day, that gate was the original carriage gate. A horse-drawn carriage would bring the caskets through there, right along this path, and either that way to your final resting place, or right through here to your final resting place. Well, let's walk around to the front of the cemetery here and the church to get a good look at it. It's actually a very beautiful structure. You don't see many things like this down in Orlando, Florida. My God. Just look at this church. And it goes way up there to the bell tower. Let's see if we can get around this tree. Crazy. And of course, in front of the church, there is an informational plaque that talks about the church, the history of it, how old it is, and the cemetery that it is built on top. An interesting fact, those spires that you see on top of the tower, they're not there anymore. In the 50s, they were struck by lightning and they had to be removed. I can honestly say that Baltimore is one of my favorite cities in the entire country. Not just because Poe is buried here. If it wasn't for the winter, I think Jessica and I would probably live here. To be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure what part of Baltimore I am standing in right now, but I am on Amity Street. More importantly, what has been named the Edgar Allan Poe Square, because right here, this was the last home of Edgar Allan Poe here in Baltimore, Maryland. At one time, all of these buildings were not here. Instead, it was all pastures and open fields. A lot has changed, obviously, since Edgar Allan Poe's lived here. Now, it's just, there's things everywhere. But in the summer of 1832, Edgar Allan Poe and his family moved to this house. There's a plaque recognizing this house as a registered National Historic Landmark here in Baltimore. It's very cool. It's a museum. It's closed right now, as you can see by the sign on the door. I wish we could just go right inside. But for those who are walking by, they do have an information plaque that talks about the house and how him and his family moved here when cholera hit Baltimore in the summer of 1832. A little bit about his death, which was quite mysterious. I've actually been to Baltimore many times, but this is the very first time that I'm actually visiting the site where Edgar Allan Poe died, and it's this building right here. There's a historical marker that says site of Poe's death. This structure, now the East Building of Church Hospital, was erected in 1836 to house the Washington Medical College. Edgar Allan Poe, author and poet, was brought here ill and semi-conscious on October 3rd, 1849, and died 4 days later. It blows my mind to think that right here in this spot is where Edgar Allan Poe died, and we're standing right here. Welcome to Fells Point in Baltimore, Maryland. It is down here on this street where it is believed that Edgar Allan Poe would come and drink, and even had his last drink before he died. Now please keep in mind that everything that I'm about to say is on speculation, rumors, legends, lore here in Fells Point. There is absolutely no way of knowing, but it is believed that Edgar Allan Poe had his last drink at the Horse You Came In On saloon down here in Fells Point. I do believe back then, though, it was called the Horse. Inside they have a few pictures of Poe up, nothing very special, but right here on the front door it says Poe's Last Stop. It is believed that he had his last drink, came out the door, and walked a couple blocks down that way and collapsed and was found unconscious taken to the hospital and died 4 days later. It's crazy to think about, right? That Edgar Allan Poe had his last drink here in this building and then died a couple days later. I guess this is a great place to pose for a picture.
Wherever I come, bad luck just comes my way. Wherever I go, hard luck is there to stay. Good luck never stays a day. Bad luck's always coming my way.